Hey y'all, here's a couple of announcements. So last week we finished off with Joseph being thrown into a pit and being sold into slavery by his own family. Great. Sounds like a happy ending, right? Well, thankfully, the story is not over yet. How many of you have been in a situation where you really wanted to do the right thing, but you had this really strong temptation that just kept nagging you and wanted to stop you from making a good decision? Well, you're not the only one. Check out this video.
Yeah! Waffles! And I thought the Waffle Fairy was just a bedtime story. Sticky stacks of golden therapy deliciousness!
Donkey, don't eat that. There's a stack of freshly made waffles in the middle of the forest. Don't you find that a wee bit suspicious? Oh, you're gonna... What are you... Bad donkey. Mustn't. I said don't.
Don't! No! Get away from it!
You did.
Uh-oh. Oh.
Look out!
Ah!
Donkey! Are you okay?
I'm fine. Ah!
Poor donkey. But I get it. When you see something you want, it is super hard to hold back. Even when someone you trust is telling you, don't do it. I think there's this weird human trigger inside of all of us. And I like to call it the, oh yeah, trigger. Because when someone says for us not to do something, I think we really just want to do it even more. As soon as Shrek told Donkey to not eat the waffles, I think Donkey, his oh yeah trigger was completely set off and there was no going back. Temptations like that can be a huge problem when we're really just trying to love God a little bit better and try to live a good life. Temptation is a lot like climbing a giant 40-foot wall. You know where they harness you in on a ropes course? And you don't realize it because people are down there are helping you climb the wall. You don't realize how heavy you are until they let go. And then they tell you what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And if you don't listen well, you'll probably slide back down the wall, have to start all over again. Temptation is like a wall. It is a barrier between us and our desire to really love God and try to love each other. I don't care if you're 15 or 105, we all are called to grow spiritually. We all are growing even if we don't really see it right away. Well, let's see if this shows up in Joseph's life. Now, after Joseph had been taken to Egypt by the Ishmaelites, Potiphar, an Egyptian, he was one of Pharaoh's officials and a manager of his household, brought him to his own household. And as it turned out, God was with Joseph and things went very well with him. He ended up living in the home of his Egyptian master. His master recognized that God was with him, saw that God was working for good in everything that Joseph seemed to do, and so he became very fond of Joseph and even made Joseph his personal assistant. He put him in charge of everything, like all of his personal affairs, his financial affairs, and his property. Now, from that moment on, God blessed that household because of Joseph. The blessing of God spread all over the house, even into the fields and the crops, and the master had everything he needed because of Joseph's presence, basically. Now, Joseph was a pretty good-looking guy, and the master had a wife who was infatuated with Joseph, and she really wanted Joseph to sleep with her. He wouldn't do it. He said to her, look, with me here, my master doesn't ask me to do anything. He has given me power over everything in this household. He treats me as his equal. I'm in charge of everything. The only thing he hasn't given me is you. You know why? You're his wife. How could I violate his trust in what he has given me and sin against God? Well, she pestered him day after day, and every day he would hold his ground. Well, one day he showed up to work and all of the other household servants were gone. Well, she grabbed hold of his coat and demanded that he sleep with her. He told her no and literally ran out of the room, leaving behind his multicolored coat. When she realized that he had left his coat and ran outside, she called to the servants to come in from the fields and began to tell them, "Look, that Hebrew shows up, and before you know it, he's trying to seduce all of us. He just tried to seduce me, but I yelled as loud as I could, and he left his coat. He was in such a hurry when he left." She kept his coat right there with her until the master came home. And she told him the same story she had told her servants. "The Hebrew slave, the one you brought into us, he came and tried to seduce me. And when I yelled and screamed, he ran out of the room and left his multicolored coat." Well, when the master heard his wife's story and she told him everything that he had done, of course he was furious. Joseph was picked up and thrown into jail at the king's palace, where all of the other major prisoners were kept. But even in jail, God seemed to provide for Joseph. God was with him. He reached out in kindness to him. He even had the head jailer really treat Joseph well, to the point where Joseph was put in charge over all of the jail and managed the whole operation. The head jailer gave Joseph free rein and never even checked on him, because God was with him. Whatever Joseph did, God seemed to work it out for the best. Now, the text makes it pretty clear that it just didn't happen to him by accident. Joseph was a very responsible guy. He took care of things. He didn't complain or whine. When he was given a task, he did the very best he could to do the very best job he could. So he was both responsible and accountable. He was trying to live a good life. But then temptation struck. Temptation is like that. You will be minding your own business, everything will be going great, and then out of nowhere, some temptation is thrown in your face. The question is not if you will be tempted, it is when you will be tempted. And how do you think you'd respond? In this situation, the wife was not taking no for an answer. She wanted Joseph, and if she couldn't have him, no one was going to have him. So even though it probably doesn't seem fair that Joseph was thrown into jail for basically doing the right thing, from all aspects of this situation, it feels like Joseph is not having the best year ever, but it almost seems like he believes that he is doing the very best he can. So I want you to think about life. I want you to think about how long this life really lasts. It's probably like a tiny grain of sand in the eternity of life with Christ. And every time we sin, we can move farther and farther from God's plan for our lives. It's a lot like we're saying, "Hey, Jesus, we love that you came down and died on the cross for us, but we just really want to have fun first. We really don't want to have to be totally responsible for everything." Well, let me summarize the rest of Joseph's story. He sat in jail for 2 years. Now, remember those dreams he had with his brothers? Well, he had a gift. God helped Joseph interpret the dreams of people in jail, so much so that he had a really good reputation. Well, one day, Pharaoh announced to his magicians that he had had the same dream several nights in a row and needed help in understanding it. Well, none of them could help him until he heard about Joseph. And he invited Joseph up to help interpret the dream, and yes, Joseph did. But Joseph made a point of saying that the reason why he did it was because God helped him interpret the Pharaoh's dream. Well, the dream was not good news. It was more like a nightmare. A famine was coming, and Pharaoh and Egypt, they weren't ready. Pharaoh knew Joseph was a hard worker, and he also knew Joseph was responsible and held accountable. So you know what he did? Pharaoh commissioned Joseph and said this: "I'm putting you in charge of the entire country of Egypt." Pharaoh told Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but no one in Egypt will make a single move without your approval." Now, that's crazy. Joseph worked hard, by the way. And though Pharaoh and all those in the jail may have mistreated him or may have lied about what he did, he never once whined or complained or demanded that they apologize. It paid off because Joseph actually became one of the most important people in Egypt because of his responsibility and his accountability in making the best of every bad situation. Well, famine was in the land, right? And guess who shows up? His brothers, looking for food. Now, can you imagine what that was like for Joseph? To see the very family members who had condemned you to slavery and even tried to kill you? Listen to what Joseph said. Joseph said this to his brothers. I am Joseph. Is my father really still alive? His brothers couldn't say a word. They were speechless. They couldn't believe what they were hearing and seeing. Come closer to me, Joseph said. I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt. But don't feel badly. Don't blame yourselves for selling me. God was behind it. God sent me here ahead of you to save lives, because there has been a famine in the land now for 2 years, and the famine will continue for 5 more years. The land is completely dead. No more food. God sent me here to pave the way, to make sure that there was someone in the land who knew how to feed everyone, to save your lives in an amazing act of deliverance. So you see, it wasn't you who sent me here, but God. He set me in place as a father to Pharaoh, put me in charge of his personal affairs, and made me ruler of all of Egypt. So hurry back to our father. Tell him, your son Joseph says, I'm master of all of Egypt. Come as fast as you can and join me here. I will give you a place to live in Goshen where you'll be close to me. You, your children, your grandchildren, your flocks, your herds, and anything else you can think of. I'll take care of you completely. There are still 5 more years of famine ahead, and I'll make sure all your needs are taken care of. You and everything connected to you. You won't want for a thing. Now, isn't that crazy? Joseph was doing for his family what they had never considered doing for him. And this is kind of the way that God works. God always gives us what we really don't deserve. But remember, Joseph made some really bad choices to begin with. Remember all his boasting and his pride? He definitely wasn't doing it now. In fact, his boasting had been transformed into confidence and compassion for others who make bad mistakes, just like he did. And so the story continues. The brothers left Egypt and went back to their father Jacob in Canaan. When they told him, Joseph is still alive and he's the ruler over the whole land of Egypt, Jacob went numb. He couldn't believe his ears. But the more they talked, telling him everything that Joseph had told them, and when he saw the wagons and everything Joseph had sent to carry them and all of their family and all of their belongings and household back to Egypt, Jacob's spirit was revived with joy. He said, I've heard enough. I believe my son Joseph is still alive, and I want to go and see him before I die. And so Jacob and his family moved to Egypt and literally survived the famine because of Joseph's care. Literally, all 12 tribes of Egypt ended up in Egypt. Israel literally took up residence in Egypt and was the beginning of yet another story that you might be familiar with about a guy named Moses. But I want you to think of 3 important things to consider in this story. 1, character. Though Joseph started out a little rough with his pride, it seems he learned quickly. He understood that his integrity and his character were more important than anything else. Could he have gotten away with a lot being in charge of the master? Could he have stolen from him? Could he have taken advantage of the master's wife? Absolutely. But somehow he knew God wanted more for his life than that. God is always going to ask us to make the right decisions in really hard situations and tempting ones. God empowers us through the Holy Spirit to choose the things that give us life. Our character, our integrity, honesty, compassion, kindness, responsibility, those are the most important things we have. And they're also the most difficult to keep in check. Number 2, choices. We always have choices. That was a silly video about Donkey, but many of us have made similar choices when temptations attacked, like whether to go to that party or not, or whether you should leave the party when it starts getting out of hand. whether you should look at that particular website on the internet, or whether you should Snapchat that picture or not, whether you should watch the movie you're not supposed to be watching, or whether you should hang out with your friend who you know has a history of making some bad decisions. We always have choices. Number 3, counting the costs. Joseph chose the way of character. He considered his choices and acted in a way that reveals he was really considering the cost of his decisions and how would it impact himself and others. His future would be one that would not only involve himself, but his entire family and an entire country of starving people. God would not have been able to care for the people of Egypt or bring reconciliation unless Joseph had followed through on counting the costs. Now, one last thing. This is really hard for us to do, especially teenagers. I want you to work on correcting your long-term thinking. The good news is God does not leave us alone when faced with temptation. He has given us the Holy Spirit inside of us. This Holy Spirit guides us to wisdom if we seek it. God whispers inside of us when we're confused and lost. He is present in every decision that we can make. But the hardest part of growing up is learning that short-term thinking doesn't get us very far. It's important to look far beyond today or tomorrow, but maybe to where we want to be in a year or even 5 years from now. I know it sounds like it's so far away, but guys, trust me, it'll be here before you know it. Doesn't mean we have to obsess about the future, because today is really all we have. But learning to live with character, making good choices, counting the costs, and correcting our long-term vision will help us discern what it takes and what it means to have the best year ever. See you later.